Matt is someone I met through the depths of the internet, and he took the brave step of flying to Scotland to meet a stranger and then got in his car and drove to the middle of nowhere. And since there, we've formed a real strong friendship. Matt just happens to be a ninth dimensional warlock from the future. And he's traveled back in time to tell us that we need to preserve our BBC micros because they're the only real way to control power in the future. And so Matt, I'd love if you started now telling us about the Magick Smoke.
Okay. Right, let me just set my timer going so I know what the fuck is going on. Hi, yes. So before I start, huge caveat that I've just had to turn my fan off and close my windows so that you can all hear me, which means I will probably start sweating like a pig by the end of this. Basically, this is my talk, the Magick Smoke. I probably reiterated over the slides about why the fuck I'm doing any of this stuff over and over, and have come to the conclusion that I probably can't adequately explain it. So if those slides don't make any sense, just replace everything I say with why not. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah, this first slide, on the right hand side here, we've got a magical sigil that I've generated using some Python that I've written. And this is basically like more towards the current state of the art with what I'm trying to do with like magical sigils and stuff like that. But like around the outside, we actually have the talk title, The Magick Smoke, in the angelic Malachim alphabet, which is supposed to be much like everything in Western occultism attributed to King Solomon, but it actually comes from the 16th century, where I think Cornelius Agrippa just pulled it out of his ass. So that's the sort of level of making sense that this is going to make. So who am I? I'm Matt, or Aholiab, or Grimmware, depending on where you meet me. I work in cybersecurity. I'm a bit of an esotericist and a bit of a goth, and I like doomy things. Case in point here, this photo is an alternative album cover from about 10 years ago, when my friend Pete decided that for his, I think it was his 40th, I don't know, anyway, for his birthday, he wanted to travel up to the top of an ancient burial mound at midnight on the winter solstice, because that was his birthday, wearing black robes and to play some acoustic drone doom to the stars. And everyone said, haha, that's very funny. And I said, yes. So we went up there, we recorded an album, because at the very last second, he said, oh, hang on, and set a recording on his iPhone. Unfortunately, the whole thing came out perfectly and is completely terrible. But this is the sort of thing that I like to do with my spare time. So what's this about? Basically, it's a story, and I like all of my talks that I do to constitute something of a story, especially if they can be a cautionary tale. You know, the whole don't do what Donnie don't does thing. So basically, the story is about how I blew up a BBC Micro B power supply by channeling occult powers. I fixed it. I then recovered the program that blew it up from a corrupt file system, repaired it, and learned a bunch, but I didn't learn my lesson. So why? Well, for the glory of Satan, of course. But more seriously, so basically I've been sort of doing a certain amount of like reading, would we call it research? Probably not really research, I'm reading things on the internet. Into sort of religion and occultism and everything like that. And also there's a certain element of aestheticism in the whole thing. But I mean, like, this picture on the right is, I got this shirt, which I don't know if anyone will recognize the symbol in the middle, but it's a set of combining diacritics in the Telugu alphabet that when combined together and texted to someone with an iPhone, it would completely crash and reboot the system. This is a photo of me wearing said shirt on the day that the patch came out. So basically I got the t-shirt for the bug before the patch for the bug. But I really like the idea that effectively you were texting somebody a piece of data which worked as a magic spell. and killed their phone. And I really enjoy those parallels between magic and technology. But also, like I say, I work in cybersecurity. And as much as we like to pretend that all of the biggest risks in cybersecurity are technological, by and large, they're people. And they're based on what people believe about themselves. Like, I'm not stupid enough to click on a phishing link, that sort of thing. And I think that the field of what people want to believe and what things people come up with to believe tells you an awful lot about people and how they think and how they act. But also, you know, I just enjoy the aesthetics of the thing, like the whole like doomy, like, you know, I listen to a lot of metal, so like the whole doomy, like, you know, Satan laughing spreads his wings, Black Sabbath thing. It's just fun, right? And I think that a lot of technology these days, we've lost our sense of aesthetics in it. That, like, I mean, effectively, the only difference between ritual and technology is aesthetics. So a little bit more context, because I don't want to come across like a complete crackpot on something that's recorded and distributed on YouTube later. So personally, I don't believe in gods or magic, or at least not magic in the Dungeons and Dragons sense. But I do believe in the irrationality of people, including myself. And so this is a lot of sort of research and introspection into thinking about the person who I want to be, and then thinking about, you know, what methods are available to me to actually be that that rational person, but also, you know, to use the tools available to me to understand myself better, and to also focus myself better. Because, like, I mean, we all suffer from the problem of procrastination, yet we like to believe that we have any degree of control over ourselves. So it's kind of like, where do we marry those two up? So I'm curious about the evolution of belief systems. So for example, like, you know, we present Christianity these days as wholly monotheistic, but if you read Exodus and Genesis, you actually realize that whole I'm a jealous God thing. Actually, the ancient Semitic religions are polytheist. So we talk about these religions as if they've not changed over time, when they absolutely have. I mean, even just look at the difference between Old Testament and New Testament. I'm especially interested in the technology of religion. So, you know, like, whilst I might not believe that there is a God, or I might not believe in, you know, sort of Buddhist ideals of enlightenment or whatever, there's those ideas of ritual and meditation in order to focus the mind to achieve certain goals, which I think is very interesting. And I think it would be pretty bold of us to assume that because we don't believe in the core tenets of those religions, that there is nothing of use in there. That, like, you know, Buddhists haven't been meditating for thousands of years because it doesn't do anything for you, right? But also, I think the belief systems say more about the commonality of people, the way that they think, than they do about any truth. So I think the really interesting thing here is the difference between, like, magic and religion. So the occult tends to focus more on personal agency more than religion. So it's like, less you are doing this for God, so much as here are some magical powers, do what you fucking want with them, which is an interesting concept. And the other thing in this is just like spell books and grimoires and gnarly. So I don't know if you've got me on side-by-side view at the moment, or if you can just see my slides, but like, I've got a whole selection of variously apocryphal books here that all take on this whole thing from completely different aspects. So just to nip through a few of them. So, like, one of my personal favorites is the Black Pullet, and it also known as the hen that lays the golden eggs. So it's about constructions of talismans of power, which is gnarly as fuck anyway. But basically was written towards the end of the 18th century, and it has no real claims to historical antiquity. You know, it doesn't refer back to, oh, you know, King Solomon did this or whatever. And it's just so wonderfully arbitrary. And I think that's one of the interesting things about it. It's like, all of this stuff has kind of come from like why did you go with that particular imagery? Like, what is the core thing you're trying to say you achieve and get across here? And like, it's got some wonderful quotes in it. Like, the earth is full practically to the center of gnomes. yeah, I'm not even going to go there. So like one of the more well-known ones, the Lesser Key of Solomon. This particular translation is absolutely amazing because so this is supposed to be about King Solomon, so the biblical King Solomon and all the demons that he talks to. This edition is really interesting because it compares various translations, but it's best when it's taking the piss out of Crowley's shitty addendum. So like Aleister Crowley did a publication of this where he's just talking complete bunk. He's done none of the translation, so he's extrapolating on mistranslations. And it's got loads of magical seals and sigils in. And then a more modern one, Libanow and Psychonaut, I think it's released in the 80s, claims literally zero antiquity and is a more modern take on magic. So it's more about that whole sort of religious technology ideal of like, what can I do with meditations and rituals in order to shape the way that I perceive the world and how I interact with the world? There's also the Necronomicon, which pretty much tries to claim that Lovecraft wasn't making it all up, which is also interesting. Interesting parallels between Cthulhu mythology and the ancient Sumerian creation epic. There's some fucking crazy shit in there. So anyway, basically, all of that said, this prompted me into deciding I'm going to try and do something combining magical practice of sigils with some antiquity. Antiquity, BBC Micro. So basically, my friend Pete, who I previously alluded to, he left me his BBC Micro B and a bunch of other old computers when he left the country. So I fussed about with it, but I had no storage for it. There's no disk drive with the thing. So I basically write some of these programs, take photos of them to store them. So I wrote this guy. So it's basically, this is a listing over the top of the original program that just draws an inverted pentagram. So you can see I wrote this program out, took a photo of it. So after that, I was like, cool. Basically, every time I want to see that, though, I have to type it in again. And like typing on a BBC it's not like typing on a modern computer. Also, the thing shits the bed occasionally. So there's that. Basically, I ordered an SD card adapter and an SPI ROM from eBay and fit it all, and then basically couldn't get it working. So this is a way of mounting several different disk images from an SD card as if they're mounted in a disk drive. Basically all the instructions that if you buy anything from any of these vendors for stuff for retro computing, they'll send you all of the data on a CD. And guess how many optical drives I have in the house? So I basically tried to fit it, didn't really get it working, shelved it for a while. Some months later, I figured out how to get it working. And so I started taking this program and writing it again, but this time to the SD card, storing it. Whilst I'm doing so this photo took literally seconds before there was a loud bang, a burning smell and smoke. So whilst I was trying to draw occult symbols and write them to this SD card, the sheer power of Satan blew up the power supply on the BBC Micro. So I ordered a capacitor replacement kit from eBay and hoped that it would fix it. Then fast forward quite a lot of time because guess what? Again, they sent me the instructions on a CD. I didn't have an optical drive. So there's an intermission of a few days here where I necromance a drive out of an old Dell laptop and then had to order a slimline SATA to USB adapter and then try and supply it with enough fucking power that it would actually read the stuff off the discs. But I managed it. So then I got on to repair, and this whole section of it is basically excerpts from my Instagram because I documented the whole thing on my Instagram. So basically what happened here is you can see capacitor C2 is what blew up. This is actually from the documentation I got. You can see on this though, that you can see their capacitor C2 also blew up because you can see all of that splat there. If you look at my camera, this is the offending guy. You can see, excuse me. You can see where he blew the fuck up. Basically, he's all big and fat now, like a magical danger pillow. So basically, those are the three capacitors which you have to replace. So on I go and start replacing capacitors. So again, here's our capacitor. This is basically getting the power switch out was the longest part of the repair. It took me maybe half an hour to just get that thing to come out. The power supply is built like a brick shit house. I will never say that thing of any computer part ever again after having dealt with this thing. Here's a fun example of what the circuitry looks like. And this is like repairing one of these is not difficult because everything is jumbo sized. Doing the soldering is not hard at all. Even I can do it. And oh, no, next slide, please. And so this is, you can see basically where I'm replacing all the various capacitors. And here, I don't know if you're going to get any of the audio on this, but that's okay if you don't. And there it is, powering on and coming back up again after I did the surgery. So yeah, basically got it working again. So then I basically went on to continue writing this program, stored it to the SD card. Here's the directory listing. Here you can see in the bottom corner is the program working. All done, right? No, not at all. Remember this slide from earlier where I said some months later I figured out how to get the SD card working. Well, turns out actually I was full of shit because what I'd done is I had used the wrong command. It turns out that the SPI ROM itself comes with various different commands you can use to mount various different kinds of SD card or something. And I used the wrong one. I used the card command when I should have used the DMMC command. So basically what these commands do, card is supposed to tell it, okay, for all of the disk operations I'm about to tell you, use the SD card. Then we insert, so disk in, disk image 0 from the SD card, because you can have multiple disk images. Disk 0 into drive 0. Or it might be drive 0, it might be the other way around, whatever. And then dcat is supposed to give you a list of all of the disk images that's available to you. Except when I was doing it, it was shitting out a bunch of gibberish. Basically, you can see the example like here, the cat command, however, with the disk image inserted, was listing just fine. It was loading the programs just fine. But basically, I discovered that this was a real problem when I inserted the SD card back into my laptop to find a corrupt file system. So I went back, I fiddled around, and I discovered the DMMC command. So basically, when I did dcat, it would actually list out all of the disk images available to me. So I was able to reconstruct a new disk image, which I could dump Elite onto. Like I had a bunch of like games and shit. And now I could write my programs and store them again. But here we have a problem that like basically I had these programs which I wrote that are lost. And I wanted the original copy of the one which Satan used to blow up my BBC Micro. So how do I get my code back now that it's all working correctly? So what I did is before I reformatted the SD card image, I dd'd the whole thing out to a file. And then I did the only thing which I could think of to do. I took a hex dump of it using XXD and then grepped for pent because I had these function names, draw pentagram. So, I mean, they've got to be stored in strings in there somewhere, right? And they were. So what you can see is what you can see here in the hex, we've got actually two programs here. So the top one is the pentagram program. The one below is where I had that shit spelling out Grimmware. And XXD also has a -R option for ingesting hex dump and outputting binary. So I figured what I could do is I could just cut out my section of the program and reverse hex dump it back into the binary. And then all I need to do is reconstruct the file metadata so that the BBC knows how to load the file. So doing a bit of Googling around, I found some information about the file metadata. So there's basically like a .int file that goes with every binary. So our program's called pent. So we need a pent.int file. And it's got basically most of the data in there you could copy across from another loadable basic file. The only thing that was missing is a CRC, which is basically a kind of checksum. Now, I found this example of this code online, just in some documentation about a BBC, like BBC basic files. And so I was able to use this C code to reconstruct a CRC calculator, produced all of the metadata files, produced the disk image, reconstructed, basically like proved that my CRC worked against some known good metadata, which had actually produced on the BBC itself. And all good, right? Well, no, because, and this is where it gets a bit fucking weird. And sorry about the resolution. This is literally just screenshots of my working notes, my grimoire, as it were. So you can see I'm using this program up the top here, Beeb, and it's a collection of Perl stuff for doing BBC disk utility operations. And what it will do is it can actually take one of these BBC basic programs, which aren't quite scripts, but aren't quite binary files. And it can output the actual like listing. And you can see here what I've done, Beeb list the file, and it's getting some corrupt output towards line 60. So I go and I have a look at the equivalent part of the hex dump, and you see this bit I've underlined here, C2, C2. Now this is basically, this corresponds to like this right. So they must be metadata characters. So I'm like, okay, C2, C2, that's got to be our thing here. So I look to another part of the file, like, so further up, we've got like proc draw circle, proc draw pentagram. So I'm able to compare to the hex there. And what I see is that actually, after that YC, it should be a 2C, not a C2. This is the point at which I realize in my corrupt disk image, there are random, not bytes, but nibbles, so half bytes inserted and removed throughout the file. What the fuck? I still don't know why this is, but basically the thing got mounted wrong. It's had, I don't know, something's happened in the data stream. So by this stage, I'm actually on a call with a bunch of people from 57 North at the time. I was slightly drunk. So I'm just like, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll hex dump this stuff out and I'll manually edit it in like Vim. I can reflow everything and just add null bytes to the end wherever I've removed a nibble. I can remove null bytes from the end every time that I've added a nibble. So it should still remain roughly, it should still work, more or less. So I do this and I basically remove that, that C that's in there so that it's 2C, 20. And that works. And you can see here, like, so the top example is basically the broken version before. The next example is after I go through this process and do Beeb list again, and you can see I actually get another line out. So, hey, our plan works. So basically fast forward a little bit, and I'm going to do a very quick demo here. So basically, that whole backing and forthing with Vim and like writing macros to reflow everything, it didn't really scale as an approach. So what I did is I wrote nibble mode for Emacs. So what this is it's a nibble-wise hex editor that will actually allow you to reflow the data, because most hex editors only allow you to like replace characters, because in like a linked binary or whatever, you move things around and it all suddenly fucks up. But like basically like with nibble mode, what we can do is we can nibble, what was it? Hex load. So we nibble hex load and we're going to load /bin/ls, right? Let's put it in nibble mode as well. So I've got all my syntax highlighting here. So I can like sort of randomly add, remove things, and it will show me like where things are happening. But basically this whole thing works based on this, the layout. And this is one of the advantages of using something like Emacs, is that actually you can say, when I want to dump this back into a file, I can just load that middle column of data, strip all the white space out, reflow it to something that can be re-ingested and turned back into bytecode. So that's what we did. So as an example here, what we can do is in ls, so we've got this usage string. What I can do is I can take, so like 75 here, which is U, we can change that to 76. And then I can do, what was it, nibble, hex, that one, hex save and reload. So let's go slash Nazi. Okay, so basically what it's done is it's written that out. And if we go over here, what we can then do is do like .ls, blah, 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 blah. And you can see that actually that help text has come up as vseg instead of usage because I was able to modify the hex there. So that's basically just my proof that I did actually write a hex editor. Once I did that, I was able to go through and edit, like the obvious bugs were obvious, but some of the stuff was actually more involved with like line metadata and stuff like that. So I was able to find bugs where like the line length was specified wrong or more data was inserted or removed. So long story short, I was able to basically repair the file, load it onto the SD card, recalculate the checksum and everything like that. I loaded it onto the basic once, and it found a bug that the Beeb utility didn't. But then so it was basically like a random nibble inserted where I'd actually corrected the line length instead of removing the nibble that shouldn't be there. But here we go. Here's the program loading up. Sorry about the slow typing. It's because I was trying to hold my phone at the same time. And this is just inputting the center, the coordinate, and the radius. And there we go. So we basically hex repaired the corrupt file. Basically, just to wrap up here, and I'm saying end of campaign because part of the reason I've got this talk slot is because it's 7 p.m. I need to fuck off because I'm going to play Dungeons and Dragons like a cool kid. So what did we get out of this entire process? So the experience. Well, first thing we learned is replace the capacitors in your retro computers before turning them on. There is no exception to this rule because they will blow up. And it's questionable as to whether they'll ever come back again. So we also learned some PSU repair, basic file format and file metadata, how to use Emacs as a front end for doing weird stuff. And I still have no idea how we got the nibble offsets. In terms of what we materially got out of the situation, I've got a BBC Micro B that isn't imminently about to blow up, a bunch of BBC resources and programs from those disks, which I managed to necromance. A powerful relic. This is the capacitor and the fuse that blew up, so I can use this in magic spells because it's full of satanic power now. And a new cantrip, like basically we can do nibble-wise hex editing whenever, and a new project for generating magical sigils with all the utility of a modern computer. Another example of which I have right at the end. So basically, I'd like to build an extension cable for the user port on the BBC, because basically at the moment I have to lift it up in order to insert my SD card, which is a huge pain in the ass. I'd like to write more for the pentagram drawing program, like maybe get it to do a full sigil of Baphomet or something. Recover the Grimmware program, which I haven't done yet. And further iteration on generating magical sigils, like the following. This is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know that any of that made any sense, but I had fun doing it anyway.